Greetings, cinephiles. Are you looking for a movie analysis podcast that stands above the rest? Then look no further than Collateral Cinema, the only movie podcast that matters.
We analyze good movies, we analyze bad movies, and yes, we also analyze the in-betweens of the world of cinema.
So if you like what you hear, find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
And listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and wherever you get your podcasts.
And yes, my friends, we are 420 friendly. So when you listen to us,
smoke it if you've got it.
And now, here's a new episode of Collateral Gaming. The show starts right now.
I'm Ashley Chancellor, and this is Collateral Gaming. Welcome back to Collateral Gaming, the only video game podcast that matters, where we focus on good games, bad games, and everything else in between in the world of gaming. I'm podcasting straight from Houston, Texas, and yes, my friends, this is a 420 friendly podcast, so whatever you have, be it dabs, blunts, or bongs, smoke it if you've got it. And in fact, go ahead and just smoke it all out. Make yourself your own personal fog world, because that's what we're doing today. We're visiting the fog world and the other world in more detail. This is part 2 of our Silent Hill 2 remake episode. If you haven't listened to part 1, that was our spoiler-free review. Bo Maddox and Robert Ortegon from Collateral Cinema joined me for that. Today we're going solo. None of my co-hosts have completed this game, and I didn't manage to get a guest host, so that's okay. We can do our thing, and I think it's going to be a good episode regardless. I have a lot to talk about. Holy shit. So the last time that we recorded this, I had played through the remake once, and I'd gotten only one of the 8 endings. I've now completed the game 4 times. I have not only seen all 8 endings, including the new 2 endings that they've added to the remake, but I have platinumed the game. That's right. I got the platinum trophy on PS5. I have done everything there is to do in Silent Hill 2 2024. So I feel I'm qualified to talk about this. If there's any episode that could be a solo episode, this is it. And this was my personal game of the year, so very, very passionate about this. I'm excited to talk about it. If you're listening to this podcast for the first time and you're wondering, man, is this guy just going to do this whole thing by himself? Not a usual occurrence. But again, this is part 2, so you should probably go listen to part 1 first. Especially if you haven't played the game, right? Because this is where we're going to be getting into full spoiler details. Not only have I played through all of Silent Hill 2 Remake 4 times, but I've also gone ahead and played through the original Silent Hill 2 on PS2. That's right. I had mostly completed the game 4. I had gotten maybe 3/4 of the way through the game, and now I have fully completed it. I started a new playthrough and beat the entire thing on emulator. So, yeah. Like Silent Hill 2 Remake, I was going for the leave ending. That was the ending I got the first time I played through this game, and it was also the ending that I was trying for. I knew the general requirements, so I was aiming for it. But yeah, let's get into the juicy details of Silent Hill 2 Remake, and we can fully compare it with the original game now. I'm in a unique position to do that finally, which is good. This is a good place to be. I've just been addicted to it the entire time. I've never lost interest in this game. If I stopped playing it, it was only because I was having to play other things for the podcast. But every bit of time I could soak into Silent Hill 2 has been soaked into. My family can tell you, when I came down to visit, I was playing through this game. I played through this game another 2 times, My first run of the game was, of course, my regular playthrough. It was my chance to play through the game the way that it was meant to be played and just sort of explore it for the first time. Every other playthrough after I did a New Game Plus, The second playthrough was kind of my way of getting all of the other endings of the game that or as many as I could unlock in a single playthrough. I think it's actually possible to get at least 5, but I missed getting the or possibly 6 actually. But because I didn't get the in water ending, the stillness ending was locked from me, and I missed one of the ritual items for rebirth. So I had to save those 2 for my third playthrough, which was my completionist playthrough. I got the last 2 endings. I also got every single glimpse of the past and every single strange photo for the trophies. That was pretty much all I had left as far as trophy collection goes. And then I forgot the memos. So on my fourth playthrough, which was meant to be my speed run, where I was attempting to get the trophy for completing the game in under 10 hours, playing without the radio and without ranged weapons, which is helped considerably by the chainsaw that you get in New Game Plus, which is a one-shot melee weapon. um, I also had to collect all memos in that playthrough, but I managed to still do it in under 4 hours. I completed the game. If I wasn't collecting every single memo, I think this could be done in 3 hours. So there you go. I played on all 3 difficulties. My first playthrough was on normal. On my second playthrough, I tried out hard. The other 2 playthroughs, I went ahead and played on easy first just to compare it, and third because it was my speed run, and playing through the game with light combat and light puzzle difficulty was the easiest way to play it as quickly as possible, while also skipping all of the cutscenes on that final time, which actually was kind of hard for me to do because I really enjoy the performances. Holy shit! I mean, just right off the bat, I'm glad that we get the opportunity to actually talk about some of these moments in detail because in part 1 we discussed the fact that the character performances, which are done by professional actors this time, and with the addition of motion capture, we're able to do things like letting the body language, facial expressions, or even just the way that the actors inflect their dialogue really do all of the heavy lifting as far as the writing goes. So you can remove some lines and you can just allow the all the labor on the part of the actors who are professional actors this time around. One thing that I noticed in particular that I thought was very effective was at the point in the story where James kills Eddie after the end of the Toluca prison slash labyrinth section slash Silent Hill Historical Society. At the end of the labyrinth section, you fight Eddie in both the original and the remake. After killing him, there's this really corny line that James delivers in the original PS2 game where he's like, "I killed a man or a human being." That's right. I killed a human being. A human being. A real human being. No, we don't get that song from Drive added in there, but uh, just the way he delivers it is so cheesy. What I like about it in the remake, and I think I alluded to this in the part 1 review, is that James just sort of looks at his hands, which is nice. And you kind of can just tell by his facial expression and the way he's looking at his hands that all the work's been done as far as conveying that emotion to you. We don't have to be told. I mean, we know what James just did. We saw him just kill a dude. It's the first person that we've seen him kill, and obviously he's grappling with the weight of it, which is very telling for facets of his character, particularly interesting facets of his character, right? But you kind of see this pain expression on his face, and he's really just struggling to grasp that. And it wasn't self-defense. He really had no choice. Eddie was going to kill him, so he defended himself. But still, the implication of killing a person does that much to James. Here's what's really interesting. At the very beginning of the game, what is James doing? He's looking at his hands. So a little clue there for the observant to notice, or fans of the original might more easily pick up on that, or on second playthrough, because again, this game encourages multiple playthroughs with its multiple endings and different difficulty settings, and just the fact that you can try to collect everything and notice all of these details. Understanding, the big plot twist that James murdered his wife. I really hoped that they would add the pillow as an unlockable weapon in New Game Plus, just as a joke weapon. That would be hilarious. They didn't do that, but can you imagine? Bloober Team DLC. I want to see Born from a Wish, which, by the way, I did have the chance to play, and that adds a very interesting spin to Maria's character. We'll get into her in a bit. Yeah, do Born from a Wish, because that's an important part of the story. And yeah, they released that as DLC. Hey, if you really want to make a lot of people happy, because I know someone's gonna complain and be like, "Oh, it should have been part of the full game," like they did with Persona 3 Reload. You know, if you really want those people to shut the fuck up, just release it for free. You could do that. You could release the DLC for free. I don't mind. I would totally pay for it, especially if they go to the links to expand it like they did in this game, and you know, just the little attention to detail that really just sells this product. Um, you know, like I mentioned, there's some other details that I think that they did really well. There's a particularly notable jump scare in the original Silent Hill 2. I know we talked about how both the original and the remake don't really rely so much on jump scares, but there are a couple of them in both games. And one such example that is actually in both is in the original game, when you're in the prison section, if you're the type of player like me that goes around and basically inspects everything, you're likely to check every stall in the women's bathroom and see if, you know, there's anything to find in there, health drink or some kind of item to help you, right? So you check each of the stalls. The last one from the door is locked. So, okay, you're like, okay, it's a locked stall. That happens. You walk away towards the door, and then suddenly there's this crashing sound, or I really couldn't identify it in the original game. It sounded like a crashing sound. In the remake, it's actually a scream. It sounds like a woman's scream. And I feel like that makes it that's an even more effective jump scare. I mean, because if you're gonna have it, let's make it scary, right? Either way, I mean, I jumped out of my seat, I think, the first time I heard that crash. Now, when I was playing the remake, I did expect it, but the second time around, but I do actually remember coming across that during my first playthrough, and I didn't remember playing through that section in the original. I'm sure I did, but because I'd gotten that far in the story, and I was still the same type of player, but I just didn't recall it at the time because it had been a few years, and it had only been the one time. So that scream also got to me the first time I played on the remake. But I don't think I had remembered exactly where it was at. I just remembered there was a scream there, and I hadn't connected it to the bathroom scene in the original game. So I'm checking the stalls to think, okay, is this little detail in the remake? And I was like, oh, that was the scream. I did get got by that before. I was expecting a loud noise this time, but it was happy. I was happy that that was left in there. And again, when I was playing it as a new player, it did scare me. I probably more than the original did. So that was nice. Another little effective touch that I think is a definite improvement that was kept in the original and brought over to the remake. Another little detail from the prison section is that right at the end of it, as you're transitioning to the labyrinth, you go through the prison morgue, and if you inspect one of the corpses in the morgue, James makes a comment about how it looks like it's almost moving. And that's scary when you read it, but you know, you're just reading about it. Here's what they can do in the remake that I find was much more effective is just to hear moving sounds. And if you have the captions on, you'll see on screen moving sounds, which actually makes that a little scarier because you're like, what the fuck? Something's moving? Again, the sound design in this game is excellent. It fucks with you. But I like how they actually kept that particular moment in the original intact. The prison is definitely the scariest section of the game. Holy shit. That and the labyrinth, but I think the prison in particular, and both the original and the remake, that section is just terrifying because it's much darker. The setting is very unsettling, you know, and you feel even more alone somehow. I mean, you're like you're below the earth. You had to travel through the historical society down that long, long, long staircase. It, I believe the Toluca prison would be in the other world because it's not actually there. The Silent Hill Historical Society was built in the grounds of it, so it no longer exists in the modern day. Therefore, we could assume that James enters the other world when he goes to Toluca prison. Um, but yeah, I mean, and there's just those little moments, that voice that you hear chanting, that's back. Like all the other areas in the game, they've expanded it. So instead of just having one section of the game of the prison that you go through, uh, I mean, it was a huge, wide open area in the original game. Don't get me wrong, with a lot of little different areas within it, but it was all one section. They've actually separated that into like four different subsections and all around like a main hub section that you have to do a weight puzzle to progress through. The puzzles are a lot heavier this time. I feel. I mean that they're about placed about as often throughout the experience. Like proportionally as the original. But I mean, obviously the game is at least twice as long. So there's more of them, and I do feel that the puzzles are more difficult, more involved, and I like how they've turned sections of the game that were kind of just, yeah, let's go through this and do this one thing, into puzzles, turn it into a mechanic. They've even switched around some of the puzzles in the game and their placements, which is nice, so that you can keep those veteran players on their toes, and they've drawn out these puzzles. In the original game, there was the clock puzzle. You just get in the apartments, you get the clock key, and then you can move the hands on the clock. Uh, the puzzle in the remix is a lot more involved. You have to go collect each of the hands one by one of the clock, and then position them. So they've done a lot, and going back to Toluca Prison, in the original, you had to collect the 3 tablets to give you the horseshoe. You also had to collect a wax doll and a lighter, I believe, and you could create your own little handle to progress through a section of the game. That's actually been included as a glimpse of the past. I think I mentioned in part one that all these glimpses of the past that you can find, which are I guess untracked collectibles, but there is a trophy for getting all of them, are all references to the original Silent Hill 2. So you can actually see that little makeshift handle as a glimpse to the past, but it's not part of the main puzzle. Instead, you've got and again, it goes back to that yard room, which is where you brought the tablets in the original. By the way, all the tablets are also glimpses of the past. All 3 of them can be found in different spots. But yeah, there's this whole weight puzzle, scale and weight puzzle that you have to go through. And so that opens up different sections of the prison. And so you find all these little areas that are familiar, but they're their own dedicated sections. And so the prison was an area that they definitely expanded on quite a bit. They did the same thing with the labyrinth. That one rotating cube puzzle is actually kind of the central gimmick of it. And so essentially, you move that rotating cube in order to move the bigger cube to access other corridors and rooms. But each time you do, you actually unlock a whole different subsection of the labyrinth. So again, all of these little familiar areas that were all just part of one section have now been subdivided. And so you have the rot area and the ruined area and the desolate area, I believe. Not in that order, actually. And it's the desolate and then the ruined area. And then there's the flooded level, which is combined with the desolate area. And all of those feature different aspects of what was the original labyrinth, and some of the same puzzles are there. Some of the same layouts may seem a little bit familiar, but overall everything is different. What you'll notice is that the vibe is very much the same. The aesthetic is intact, but they changed the layout of every area while keeping some parts of it at least familiar. So yeah, the labyrinth has been expanded in that way. And so every time you finish one section, you go back to the rotating cube and you're able to move the bigger cube in a different way to unlock a different section. But you actually have to do them in order. And then there's a strange photo that's in the big cube too, which is fun. You don't get to wield Pyramid Head's sword, the giant knife, as a permanent weapon. Of course, you didn't really want to in the original. It was a fun little collectible you could find in the labyrinth when you got to Pyramid Head's room, but like, there's only really one area of the game that it's even remotely useful, which is the Eddie boss fight. Otherwise, it's just useless. It was a fun little thing to have, but let's be real, it's something you tried out one time and then you were done with it, right? And so they've kind of condensed that, and you just kind of use it for one puzzle section. You don't even use it to attack enemies, but uh, I mean, considering how unwieldy it is, and it's even more unwieldy in the remake, you're kind of glad you don't ever have to use it as a weapon. It's just kind of like, okay, so now you actually have to use the giant knife, but you just use it for a little while, and then James drops it because it's not feasible to take with him just to solve a puzzle. Uh, and then that was cool. It's a neat little reference. The hyper spray isn't in the game. I think that's one thing people might be missing out on in terms of another missing weapon. But, I mean, the chainsaw is pretty fucking overpowered. Once you get that, that's gonna be your in-game weapon. I mean, at that point, all of the enemies are pretty much just fodder because they all fall in one hit to the chainsaw in New Game Plus. So I didn't miss the hyper spray. Of course, I never tried it because I still haven't played Silent Hill 2 in New Game Plus. Like, and maybe that's something I still need to do is go play through that game multiple times now. I played through it the once, but and I've seen all the endings on YouTube. But like, it would be good to earn those, and to actually play through the game multiple times, maybe even attempt the 10-star run. I don't know, that sounds very intimidating, but considering the fact that I played this in 4 hours with no ranged weapons and no radio, that it helps. On the radio, actually, I found that it's not really all that necessary. Once you learn all the enemy audio cues, actually turning the radio off kind of helps. It's a less distracting. You can kind of just listen for those subtle cues that an enemy is about to pounce on you and dodge right in the way. And so it helped me kind of learn this game's combat system before. I mentioned before that during my first playthrough, I did not have the same problem that a lot of people did, which was obtaining way too many health resources and ammo. I felt that there was an adequate amount that was provided to me. I would stockpile at times when I wasn't using it, but I could go through it very quickly if I wasn't careful. The other few times I played through the game, that became less of a concern. Obviously, hard mode was much harder. And it was the hard combat difficulty, actually, I think is the better way to play the game. I think it definitely turns the game into something more difficult. And for those people who did get a handling of the game's controls fairly quickly, I would recommend that. Again, I felt that the combat was just clunky enough that it actually kind of worked, and that it actually still maintained that edge. And then that was again an element of the original game, was that the combat was very clunky and awkward. It wasn't as big of a focus in that game. I'll admit this game is a little bit more action oriented, but it is not an action game. It is still first and foremost a survival horror experience. And I think you'll spend quite a bit more time exploring than combat, or maybe roughly balanced, but it's definitely not heavier leaning towards the action. You still can avoid a lot of the enemies should you choose, and you may choose to, because if you don't have a good handle on the game's combat system, they can kick your ass. Sometimes you'll be thrown into a room, especially late game. They'll throw a bunch of enemies at you at once in a small room, which you kind of can't ignore. If you want to be able to explore the room and grab some things, and these enemies can follow you into other rooms. So uh, and in those environments, it's probably going to be necessary to fight all of them. And man, it can be a challenge. That is where the game does get a little bit more of that action heavy focus, but not like really much. So I wouldn't say it's at all defined by that. I would just say there is a slight more emphasis on combat, but the controls have been modernized to help with that. Again, it's very bare bones in the terms of modernizing what you would expect out of third-person shooter style combat. And again, because James is an everyman, it retains just enough of that clunkiness, so that you don't feel like you're a badass, because you're not supposed to. Let's throw a few cheap shots and have enemies that'll hit you in the back while you're fighting this other enemy. But once you learn the combat, you can sort of accommodate for that. Learn the audio cues, dodge. But even so, you'll still get your ass kicked every once in a while. I will say though, on my subsequent playthroughs, I did start stockpiling resources because I got quite a bit better, especially on the lighter difficulties. Obviously, once I toned down the difficulty, I was going to have that problem. But even on my hard mode playthrough, I did acquire quite a number of health resources. But that may also be because I was trying for the in water ending that time, which you get by keeping James in critical health as much as possible. So I wasn't using my health drinks and rarely ever used a syringe. Uh, mainly only if like I was about to fight a boss or something. And also once you get the chainsaw, of course, in New Game Plus, you're not going to be using ammo as much. So in New Game Plus, I definitely did start stockpiling ammo. But again, I only felt that I had those issues with ammo not being sparse enough, which for some might hamper their survival horror experience on the lighter difficulties or in New Game Plus, or when attempting a certain play style that avoided using health resources. So, but that was my personal experience. For me, I think the combat is pretty much just perfect. As far as performance goes, I think I said last time that this game was perfect in terms of performance. That there was no issues. It might be because I'm playing on a tiny little screen, so I didn't notice. But I did notice a few frame drops. Again, the PS5 version I think is much more stable than the PC version was at launch, and I don't know how much of that has been patched. But it still was mostly stable for me during my 4 playthroughs of the game. I tried both performance and quality mode. I was under the impression that since this is most of the time not a highly intensive game and not necessarily fast paced, that I may not need the whole 60 frames. But at the end of the day, it just looks so much smoother. I mean, even if you are playing on a 4K TV, it does look quite a bit better. My personal TV isn't a 4K, so I almost always play in performance mode anyway. But I think my output resolution may be lower than newer TVs because I noticed when playing at my parents' house on performance mode, it looked much better. Although it was a much bigger screen, and yeah, I think that it does have a higher resolution, which did help. So yeah, this game still looks beautiful at 60 frames. You really don't need to sacrifice those frames for the ray tracing or whatever, although that might help. So maybe try both and see how you are. I feel like, again, this is a game that maybe doesn't demand a bunch of frames, but I still do think it looks better with that smoothness. But if you pay attention to a lot of details and you like that ray tracing and being able to see the reflections and such, I feel like in this game, that might help quite a bit more. I wasn't really paying a whole lot of attention for the time that I was in quality mode, so I couldn't tell you. But and I was doing a completionist playthrough. We talked about the prison section, but I kind of wanted to talk about each of the sections of the game and how they differ and what my experience was playing these in the remake. For one, the Woodside Apartments, both or the Woodside Apartments and the Blue Creek Apartments, I should say. The apartment section. The layouts, again, are going to be different, but you still kind of walk into these areas feeling very familiar. And I did recall that section of the game particularly well towards the beginning. So yeah, I remember like getting that there was a sort of nostalgia for me, although it had been a few years, not 20 years as it has for some people. When I was entering these areas, I noticed that they swapped the placement of the coin puzzle and the clock puzzle. So the clock puzzle was originally in the Woodside Apartments, and the coin puzzle was in Blue Creek. But those have been reversed, which I guess makes sense because you get all of the coins for the coin puzzle in the or you get most of them at Woodside Apartments. In the remake, of course, you get all of them because you have to complete the coin puzzle to get access to Blue Creek. But yeah, they swapped those, and that coin puzzle in particular is more involved now with multiple stages and having to flip the coins in order to match the riddle. which is cool. So there's sort of a story, and then there's a section right at the end. There's a final question that you can pick any of the coins as a response for, but it's basically asking you, like, who do you think is at fault? The snake that bit the woman that got bit by the snake, or the man that failed to defend her? And your answer actually influences which ending you get. So, if you see the snake as evil, the snake in this case represents Mary's illness. And so, James essentially sees her illness as the real evil here, the catalyst that drove him to do what he did. I think an important facet of the leave ending is that James does take accountability for his actions, but I do think that the decision to see the illness as the ultimate evil does play a factor into that. Whereas if you choose the man coin, that's essentially James blaming himself. And by blaming himself, he's more likely to get the in water ending, of course. And then choosing the woman coin would have James blame Mary herself, I guess. So I guess that's why he decides to get with Maria. That's a very weird take, but hey, it fits. So yeah, that was kind of cool that puzzle was expanded. Most of the areas where you get those coins were the same. I mean, there's still that one that's in the garbage chute. They have a whole new safe puzzle where you get locked in a room and you have to open a safe by like checking all of the corners of the room for the code, which was really fun. So yeah, that was a cool puzzle addition. And then like I said, at the Blue Creek Apartments, they've expanded the clock puzzle into this whole thing where you have to go into different lettered doors that contain each of the clock hands. James reaching his hand in the toilet is actually to grab the minute hand from the toilet rather than a wallet with the safe code for an optional safe. Which I guess that's another puzzle that was moved. I suppose was the safe was moved from Blue Creek to Woodside in that sense, but it's no longer an optional puzzle, but a mandatory one. Instead of doing that, James has to put his hand in the toilet as a mandatory solution as well. I remember my dad was watching me play this when I came to visit my parents. And so I was like, Dad, would you ever stick your head in a toilet if you needed to do it to survive? And he's like, well, I wouldn't put myself in that position. And I don't know what my dad would do if he went to Silent Hill. But it was really funny because I stick my hand in the toilet and I'm like, see, I got the minute hand. And he's like, because that's important. And then you start to wonder, like, well, wait a second. Like, why does James have to do all this? Does he have to do all this? I mean, I guess he needed to complete the clock puzzle to leave the area, so it is 100% necessary. But you also have to wonder why he thinks to stick his hand in a toilet in the first place. And I think that was something we talked about when we did do a Silent Hill 2 review. That was why I played through the game initially a few years ago for a Victims and Villains live stream and got as far as the labyrinth area. But one thing I remember mentioning on that stream was that I'm pretty sure I mentioned it then. I don't know if you guys can fact check me or not. James, a lot of James's actions, from a gameplay perspective, are kind of like, okay, well, you see that you obviously have to interact with this object to progress, so you do. But when you think about it, from a narrative perspective, why does he stick his hand in so many holes? Why does he stick his hand in the toilet? Why does he jump down these pits? And I think it's a clear demonstration of his mental instability. Here's the kind of man who would fucking stick his hand into shit. Literally shit. As well as, just these like bug infested holes or goopy holes. Why does James feel the need to stick a piece of string or hair in the original and a bent needle together to fish something out of a drain? Like, so many of these things are so inexplicable. There's a puzzle that's kind of turned on its head. There was a locked chain puzzle in the hospital, another section that's been sort of revamped and expanded, but the chained box has actually been moved to the other world. There is the remnants of the original chain box in one of the glimpses of the past in in Brookhaven, the Fog World version. But once you get to the other world, that's where the actual gameplay chain box comes in. And one interesting change is that instead of there being a little hair in there, there's nothing. And not exactly sure what the implications of that are or what that means for James, but hey, there's nothing in the box. Some people might prefer the fact that there was the whole lore reason in the hair of the little girl and Luis. That was cool, but it was an interesting way to subvert expectations for gamers. Like there's nothing, and so it kind of has an effect on both you, the player, and James. I mean, whether you're a first-time player or even more so if you're a returning player, and you find the box is just empty, and James's face when he sees it almost makes me laugh. So yeah, they turned the chain box puzzle into like this whole thing where there's three different sections you can go in the otherworld version of the hospital, and that's how you get each of the pieces. I mean, you did have to get all of those pieces in different sections of the hospital in the original, but they've kind of subdivided it in this way in the remake. There's a bracelet puzzle that you actually complete in the regular section of the hospital, and that's where the drain pipe comes in and all that.
James? Honey? Did something happen to you? After we got separated in that long hallway? Are you confusing me with someone else? You were always so forgetful. Remember that time in the hotel?
Are you taping again? Come on. I don't know why, but I just love it here. It's so peaceful.
In my restless dreams, I see that town. You promised you'd take me there again someday, but you never did. Well, I'm alone there now, in our special place.
Just put the gun to their head.
You can't just kill someone because of the way they looked at you.
You should see your face, Jane.
Let go!
I'm sorry, Laura, but I can't let you just run around this place. You might get hurt.
Hurt by what?
This place is different from what I remember. I don't think she's here anymore.
This whole town. Might be best if you just get out of here.
Yeah, you're right.
You said you took everything, but you forgot that videotape we made.
How do you know about that? Aren't you Maria?
I'm not your Mary.
So you are Maria.
I am. If you want me to be.
How do you know about Mary?
You see it too? For me, it's always like this.
Doesn't matter who I am. I am here for you, James. See? I'm real.
But it's I really enjoyed the hospital. I think is the first time where I really felt that like oppressive atmosphere. I think in the original game, the hospital may be the first time you actually visit the other worlds, because I remember playing the original and recently and thinking, well, when I got to Blue Creek Apartments, it didn't feel like it was the other world. I mean, it might have been. Maybe I know that game was a little bit more subtle, But there really wasn't a whole lot of telltale signs that that's where I was at. There is a definite transition in the remake as you move from the Woodside to the Blue Creek apartments, where it shows that James is shifting to the other world. So that's very clear now. And some people, I think, felt that the fact that the other world has more color tones that are consistent with Silent Hill 1 and 3, I believe, which some people felt that James's other world should look different to Alyssa's other world. But I think it was they just used a bit more colors at their disposal and were a little less subtle about the changes. So it's really clear where you're at, and it's a cue for players who are more familiar with the franchise as a whole. Maybe the movie, and so having kind of that like rusty aesthetic that be a little bit more prominent in the other world, I don't think is a bad design choice. I think it just makes it a little bit more obvious and really lays on that oppressive atmosphere. Again, I felt for the first time once I got to the Brookhaven other world that, that's the way that I felt. Like I was trapped and I couldn't get out. At this point it was no longer really even looking for Laura in the hospital, but it's like, okay, like we need to get the fuck out of here. I talked about the Silent Hill Historical Society section, the prison and the labyrinth, which I guess both take place in the other world. And then, of course, the Lakeview Hotel. This is the one section of the game that I had actually not played through before. Because, again, I'd gotten as far as the labyrinth. I think I got to the end of the labyrinth, but had not fought or beat Eddie. So, rowing across Toluca Lake and getting to the hotel was my first time experience with it. And now I've gone back and I've played the original so I can compare them. But what's cool is once you get to the hotel, it almost feels like a place of respite. You're thinking, oh, this is the final section of the game. And you know what? Maybe this will be, just kind of like easy going. And at first it seems that way. The hotel is clean and nice. But as you dig into the darker corners of it and realize that there's nobody there, I mean, you do still get that feeling of isolation and tension, and the soundtrack helps with that immensely. I mean, sometimes I was wondering why the soundtrack felt so oppressive when I'm in what looks like a comfortable if abandoned environment. Of course, canonically, the first section of the hotel is actually the other world. I believe that the developers have come out and confirmed that, or at least probably Masahiro Ito. Ito-san, I know, has come and confirmed a lot of things. So yeah, which makes sense because certain monsters that generally only appear in the other world appear at the Lakeview Hotel, and also the fact is that in reality the hotel was burned. Now James doesn't know this, but so in his delusion he sees the hotel more or less as it was 3 years ago. With the passage of time, of course, he sees it as more abandoned, and it does seem to be the case that it hasn't been tended to in 3 years, and maybe that's the way James envisions it in 3 years after the fact. But the fact that it's still like pristine and that it looks mostly the same as he likely originally saw it just feeds into the lie that he's telling himself, that Mary's still alive, that she died 3 years ago, that she died from the disease. Only after watching the videotape and finding out the truth that he killed her himself, that it happened not 3 years ago. I mean, we know that it can't have happened because she met Laura, who turned 8 only a few weeks ago. At most, James must have killed her a few days ago, and it's very likely her body is in the car. If you turn on certain shaders in New Game Plus, you can actually kind of see that. That was something that was always sort of hinted at, and I believe Ito or one of the other developers did confirm Mary's body was in the car, but it's kind of nice that they allude to that even more here. And yeah, so once James confronts the truth of that, the hotel then changes. And so what we thought was the otherworld version of the hotel is actually the hotel as it truly is. And so James is waking up from the delusion. And which is really interesting because, certain endings like the Bliss ending bypass that, which is very telling. So I really did enjoy all of these different areas. I enjoyed the way that they remained true to the feeling of every area in the original game while creating an even bigger experience for the player, which was really nice. I also wanted to talk about the endings of the game. So all of the original endings are intact. We talked a little bit about Leave, which was the good ending. That was my original ending that I got. It's also the ending I got when I completed Silent Hill 2, the original game. By playing the game as if James cares for his own well-being and is not attached to Maria, but remains attached to Mary, will result in the Leave ending, which is at least in the original game weighted more heavily so that it's the ending that most players are likely to get. If you play the game normally and heal James often, you'll most likely get the Leave ending. Actions like inspecting Mary's items in the inventory can help. Although, as I recall, I think that actually mostly just avoids triggering other endings. So, which may help though, of course, if you made certain decisions during the course of the story and want to reverse that. So, to avoid triggering other endings, don't interact too much with Maria. Avoid her as much as possible. Don't be too concerned with protecting her. Don't always open the door for her or talk to her when there's an opportunity to. And don't visit her often. Also, avoid staying at low health for too long, as that is a trigger for the in water ending. Also, don't inspect the knife in your inventory, as that is a trigger. I like that there's all these little things that can contribute which ending you get. And some players might find that obtuse, but what you have to remember is that the intention of the game was not to have these very specific ways that players are supposed to trigger these endings, but rather giving the player the ending based on the way they played. And sometimes that may not even line up necessarily with the player's intention. Hey, maybe you just didn't heal James because you wanted to not waste your health resources. After all, wasting health resources is a surefire way to get the Leave ending in the original game, at least. So overhealing James actually gives you an extra point towards that ending. So if you just don't want to be too wasteful and you want to save resources, and hey, maybe you're a little bit low on health, but not, super low, you're not necessarily going to use those right away. Or maybe the game is just really fucking difficult. And like me, you spent large amounts of time not able to heal. I don't know if the game takes into account whether you have items in your inventory or not and can use them. But I know some people might be put off that they could potentially get a bad ending just because they got hurt too much and didn't heal right away. But again, you have to remember that it's not necessarily the way that the player is playing the game based on their own mindset, but the implications of why James wouldn't heal himself, especially if he has items on hand to do so, right? So I think there's always kind of a disconnect in video games. Some people don't realize that this disconnect exists, but why you may or may not do something in game does not necessarily equivalent to why your character would not within the context of the narrative. And so, you might just inspect the knife in your inventory because you think it's cool, but James inspects the knife because he's thinking of suicide, and so that's a trigger for the in water ending. Which is where James, can't deal with the truth of what he did and kills himself for it, versus leaving Silent Hill and Laura inexplicably forgiving him for killing Mary. There's some evidence that some of these endings may not actually be possible. And I'm not just talking about the joke ones. I mean, there's a whole theory. I want to get into the loop theory here because it's really interesting. But I want to talk about the other endings. Of course, there's the Maria ending. So with Maria, again, it's just interacting with Maria as much as possible, opening doors for her, protecting her, making sure she doesn't get damaged, not bumping into her, spending time to actually get more conversations with her helps as well in the remake. So actually not following her directions and spending some time alone with her, triggering, it gives you the opportunity to trigger more conversations. So funny enough, as counterintuitive as it may seem, don't do exactly what Maria tells you to do and actually wander off the beaten path a little bit. So you get some more time with her. And James has more time, I guess, to get attached. visiting her often at both the hospital and the labyrinth. Just visiting her at every opportunity you have to do so and triggering extra cutscenes is going to help. And again, just not triggering the other endings. So those are the three main endings that you can get. So whether you play James as if he cares for himself and is still attached to Mary, whether you play James as if he is attached to Maria, or whether you play James as if he genuinely does not care for his own well-being and actively contemplates suicide, that's going to change what ending you get during your first playthrough. After that, of course, much like in the original game, you have access to the New Game Plus ending. So with Rebirth, it's just collecting 4 different items over the course of the game. They can be easy to miss. One of them is at the very beginning, which you can skip if you're not paying attention, like I did. And then, of course, with the Rebirth ending, James that ends with James looking for a way to resurrect Mary via the power of the old gods in Silent Hill. One thing that's interesting I noticed is that that's the one instance where the rooftop conversation is a little bit different with Maria. At the end of the game, James mentions the fact that, I guess because over the course of the game he's collected all these items and he's learned about the what's needed to do the ritual, there's a way to bring her back. And collecting all of those items automatically grants you that ending. But those items can only be found in New Game Plus. So then there is the UFO and the dog endings, of course. Those endings allow you to bypass the final bosses, so they're conducive to speedruns. So the dog ending is actually, getting the dog ending is a little bit more involved this time. I believe in the original, you just collect the key. And the remake, you have to collect 2 parts of the key and do 2 different sections of the game. But the UFO ending is pretty much the same requirement. You have to find various areas around, find the blue gem, and then find various areas around Silent Hill to use the blue gem to trigger that, eventually using it in room 312, whereas the dog key is used right before entering 312. Both of those bypass James watching the videotape and learning the truth of what he did altogether, but they're gag endings. Well, something notable is that actually originally the dog ending was expanded. And so if you play an unpatched version of the game on disc, you can see this. The Amir the dog actually momentarily shifts James' character model into other characters. I actually kind of prefer that ending, but ultimately I think with the day 1 patch, Bloober opted to cut it to something that was much closer to the original. Honestly, I actually kind of would have preferred it had they left what they did as is, because it's just a more fun version of the funnest ending, the canon ending. The UFO ending has been changed. Rather than Harry jumping in from Silent Hill 1, it's actually the original character model of James from the PS2 Silent Hill 2, which I think is a more relevant reference. With Silent Hill 2 coming after Silent Hill 1 and hardly referencing it, Harry jumping in at the end of that ending is fun and cool. But with this game, I think it makes a lot more sense using the original Silent Hill 2. So that ending is slightly different, but the beats are mostly the same. Those are the original 6 endings of the game, and those have all been recreated. They're a little bit more involved this time. You get to see a little bit more, which is nice. You actually, for instance, get to see James in the car before he drives himself into Toluca Lake, which is cool. In addition to that, there are 2 new endings. One of them is Stillness. You can only get it after seeing the in-water ending once. So I wasn't able to get this until my 3rd playthrough. On my original playthrough, I got Leave, and then I played through the game again on New Game Plus, optimized it, trying to get as many endings as I could. So I got Dog, UFO, Bliss, one of the new endings, which I'll talk about, and in-water. And then on my last playthrough, I got Maria and Stillness and Rebirth, which was cool. But still, and then of course for my final playthrough, I just got Dog ending because it's the fastest one. But with Stillness, it's a take on the in-water ending, but Mary and or Maria appears to be in the back seat with James. So he's sort of, I guess, deluding himself into comfort during his last moments. There's been some speculation on the internet that based on the sounds that you hear, people aren't sure if that's a gear shift or James getting out of the car, but people swear that the sound is different in the Stillness ending than the in-water ending when the car hits the water. There's some speculation that James actually gets out of the car, and that maybe, driving the car into the lake may be just a way of disposing the body, something that's not answered in either the Maria or Leave endings. Like, oh yeah, hey, here's Mary in the back seat. Whoa. I mean, Maria's not a real person, so I guess she's not really going to mind too much. But Laura, and again, it is very strange she decides to leave with James in that ending based on your previous interaction. But hey, it could well be a delusion. It could be the fact that James does not leave Silent Hill at all. And we're about to talk about that. But the Stillness ending is cool. It's just a different take on a classic ending, which was cool, which was nice. And then, of course, we have the Bliss ending. This one is really interesting. At first glance, it might seem like another good ending to the game, with Leave being really the only good ending of the original game. But what happens is and it's another ending that allows you to bypass the final two bosses, because if you collect a couple of items throughout the game, there's a key that you can get, and again, only found in New Game Plus, and a box. By the way, for Stillness, there's a key that you can collect, and then there's a postcard you can get right at the end of the game, which makes it a good ending to use, as it makes it a good candidate for multiple endings on one save file. But you insert the key into the safe and enter the code, and you get the Toluca postcard. That's what triggers the Stillness ending. But Bliss actually has you open ultimately the White Claudia, which is a powerful hallucinogenic drink. Again, you got to find a key at an earlier place in the game, and then you got to find a locked box in the hospital, and then you can get the White Claudia, which you can use at any point in the game. I don't know if James actually drinks it. I knew I wasn't supposed to drink it, so until I got to the end, so I didn't. But it sits in your inventory, and you don't really know what to do with it. The game might bar you from using it for all I know. But once you get to room 312, you're supposed to use it. James consumes the drink and then watches the videotape. And this is what gets really interesting. Rather than seeing the usual videotape cutscene, and then, James sees what he actually did to Mary, right as Mary is supposed to cough, she doesn't. And she continues talking. And then James sets down the camera and comes into view of it. And this is really interesting because in the original version of the videotape, we never see James, but here we do. And this may be representative of the fact that he's now crossed over into this delusion that he's created, where Mary never got sick. Because right after that, the camera pans away to show that James is no longer sitting in the chair. And then there's multiple ways that you can look at this. Hey, maybe he did somehow create a reality or change reality so that he never killed his wife. It's more likely that there's some sort of delusion that he's lost himself in. And what I thought was a really cool explanation I saw online is that the reason James disappears from the recliner is because he has altered his memory of events. His memories of killing Mary were repressed before, but here he's entirely altered that memory in his head to where it never happened, and thus Silent Hill can no longer manifest the world that it did for James, and so none of the events of the game happen, and that's why James is no longer there. But yeah, it's really cool because it's almost as if he's crossed over into this videotape world that he's created, and James gets to live happy, I guess, in the delusion that he never killed his wife. And so yeah, I definitely love the two new endings in the game. I love the way that they've chosen to portray all of the classic endings. The dog ending is still the best one, although I really like the original version of it, and I hope Bloober Team maybe unpatches that or something, or includes it as a hey, maybe like the second time you come across the dog ending, you can actually see the different version of it. I don't know. I'm just throwing some ideas out. But ultimately, what ending you get may not matter, or maybe they all matter. Maybe every single ending is canon, because James, and we touched on this in the part one, James may be living in a loop. And I'm excited because we can actually get into this. One facet of the original game that was always interesting was that all of the bodies in the game actually are James's character model. And you can actually see that even in better detail here, going into that first body that you see in the Woodside Apartments watching the TV. I mean, those are his jeans and boots. It's obvious. All these men that Eddie kills. I mean, here's something interesting. Almost every time you encounter Eddie in the game, he's near a body. That's one facet of the game. That's one facet of his character that's very interesting. And all those bodies appear to be James, and I think all of those bodies are not real, and they're all delusions shared by Eddie and James. But really interesting to think that Eddie continues to kill all these different versions of what appear to be James. There's a line of engines in the game where he says, "How many times do I have to kill you?" I don't know. It's an interesting thought. Of course, James might be the only one seeing those bodies as himself. That may be an element of his own subconscious manifesting. And I can't say for certain that every single body in the game is James. I just noticed a lot of them very much seem to resemble him. Although there were a few that looked like they were wearing different clothes, or may have been too obfuscated by gore to tell. So, but what does that mean? Well, does it mean that every body is a version of James that has gone through the loop and died? Maybe. Or maybe it's just a sign of James's subconscious desire to punish himself. It's not too clear, but it adds some credence to this loop theory. Here's something even more interesting. I noticed, especially in the remake, that quite a few of the memos that you get, or documents that you can read in game, seem to have clues. They almost seem to be letters written by James to himself. There's a voice recording at a later point that almost in the hotel that almost seems that way. So there just seems to be a lot of evidence pointing to this theory. And here is perhaps the most damning evidence: the strange photos. If you collect every strange photo in the game, they all have a message on the front and a number on the back. And so if you collect them in, I guess you would need to collect them in the specific order that they're first able to be collected for this to work. But there's a hidden message to be found in Silent Hill 2 Remake. So if you specifically look at the number of each photo and you correspond that to the letter on the caption of each photo, you'll actually spell out, "You've been here for 2 decades." So you have to count each letter in each photo caption as what corresponds to the number on the back of it, and you'll actually get that message. And that was obviously intended. So this might just be a neat little reference to the fact the game is over 20 years old. And so, you've been here for 2 decades indicates that, yeah, you, the player, have been here. But it could also mean that James himself has been in Silent Hill for 2 decades, reliving the same nightmare over and over and over again, unable to progress. So even the good ending isn't a good ending. James is always doomed to encounter the same events. And so while we know that Eddie, Angela, and Laura are all real people that were also drawn to Silent Hills, they may have only been real people in that first iteration of the loop. And after that, they're James's their manifestations by James, because obviously Laura would not be 8 years old 20 years later, right? And would not have met Mary a year ago. So I would say, yeah, those versions of Eddie, Angela, and Laura are no longer the actual versions of those people then, if the loop theory is true. And one thing I remember reading somewhere was that James was aged somewhat in the remake to be a little bit older. And this was a decision that was made based on the players that would be playing the game in 2024. But it may also be more evidence that James himself has aged 2 decades. And I don't know if you can look at the character models and say that he's 20 years older. He looks pretty good. For being 20 years older than whatever adult age he was in Silent Hill 2. But he could just be a good looking, daddy type. So yeah, the loop theory. Very interesting. I'm not saying I 100% subscribe to it, but there's a lot of evidence for it. And I would not be surprised if Bloober team especially put effort into laying the groundwork for that theory in the remake of this game. So just something very interesting, and it means that both the original version of the game can be canon as well as every single ending, which is a fun implication. I like that, and it also kind of ties into one of the UFO ending in this game, because the original version of James states that remake James, they actually call the original Space James, but he states that he's a clone of him. So maybe James is a clone of sorts. But all in all, I think I've been talking about this for long enough. We have 2 episodes of Silent Hill 2, and I gotta say, so impressed. Every bit as much in love with this game as I was when I first played it. It definitely deserved a nomination for Game of the Year, and I'm upset that it got robbed of that. But it has been nominated in multiple categories, so I definitely think that Luke Roberts should win Best Performance, because... And Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was fantastic. The voice, the actors in that game also deserve the award, so I won't be mad if Cody Christian or Brianna White win it. But I think that Luke Roberts really deserves it. I voted for him. So go vote in the Game Awards. And go vote for a Silent Hill 2 remake in every category if you want. I think that there might have been a couple categories where I might have given it to something that I felt deserved it more, but it's up for best action adventure game. And that might seem like a hot take. A lot of people are gonna be like, "Oh, it's a survival horror. It's not an action adventure." But here's the thing: horror as a genre refers to a visual / narrative presentation, not to gameplay. So survival is the gameplay facet, right? Horror is the aesthetic facet. So survival specifically, I would say, is a subcategory of action adventure games, or maybe possibly just action games or just adventure games, depending on the game. But action adventure, by definition, is a title that has a balanced focus on both exploration and combat, which is true in Silent Hill 2 Remake. It's not solely focused on one or the other, but rather a balance of sorts between the two. So it is by definition an action adventure game. I would argue that survival games are a subgenre of action adventure games, and again, the horror part is just referring to the visual and narrative presentation. So, but that's really all I've got to say about Silent Hill 2 Remake. Go play it. I highly, highly, highly recommend it. And I also recommend playing the original game if you have a way to. Not only can it be emulated, but there is a way to play an enhanced version of it that's been updated to 60 frames, among other things. There's a fan enhancement of the PC port of the game. So if you can figure out how to get that running on your computer, that's an excellent way to. But I think that the Silent Hill 2 Remake is a fantastic introduction to the franchise. And I think ultimately, rather than replacing Silent Hill 2, like a lot of remakes, it's an opportunity to lead players to the original game and to other games in the series and the franchise as a whole. We've got a movie coming out, Return to Silent Hill. There was a trailer leak of that. Personally, I think it looks good. I know some people were complaining about the way that Maria looks and whatnot, but I thought it looks pretty cool, and I'm really excited to see Christoph Gans, director of the first Silent Hill film, return to Silent Hill to tell this story, which is one of the better stories in the franchise, if not the best. I guess I really need to go play through all of the other games in order to say that. Next year, I'd really love to do Silent Hill 4: The Room. I think we've been trying to do that for a couple years now, so I'd love to revisit it. And yeah, even if you've never played a Silent Hill game before, this is a fantastic way to. Silent Hill 2 is in both the case of the original and the remake an isolated experience. It's a story that does not require any information from either of the games, despite having 2 in the title. And this is a remake of the second game, and it's still a brilliant way to start the series and explore concepts such as psychological trauma. I mean, in some ways, I think it explores that better than the first game does. So there's a reason why Silent Hill 2 was the game that really pushed the series where it's remembered today. And Bloober team have done an excellent job of translating that experience onto modern hardware. Really, they have. They surpassed all expectations and surprised the hell out of all of us. Even me, who was rooting for them from the beginning. This was even better than I expected it to be. God, I'm addicted to this game. I want to play through it a 5th time. I'm telling you, I do. But I don't really have an excuse to. Hopefully, at least within a couple years, I'll get the chance to play through this game again. I'll have an excuse to. Maybe stream it. I don't know. It would be cool to stream this. I would definitely be down to. It would also give me an excuse to play through the original version of the game and not New Game Plus, relying on the chainsaw. I'd love to play this on hard combat difficulty. And they're puzzle difficulty too, because I love the puzzles. Let's make them as hard as possible, but without the benefit of chainsaw. I do want to mention one thing that annoys me is when using it, James tends to do like this weird like animation where he like shoves it in the air, and that gets annoying. You can dodge out of it to cancel it. You can dodge cancel it, but it's still annoying because I'm just trying to open my fucking map, and James is shoving his chainsaw like a maniac, shoving his chainsaw in the air like a maniac. There's also this weird posing animation he does that I don't think I noticed him doing without the chainsaw. I actually noticed there's a couple areas in the game where James seems to get stuck, and I'm not sure if that's because he's doing a pose or if there's if I'm clipping into things. So that might be another issue in the game, is that occasionally James does seem to get stuck, but I've noticed that I can just dodge out of it and he's fine. So, dodge all day. Just one final thing I wanted to mention. But if you enjoyed this episode, and you bear with me on this being a solo episode and with my sick voice, yes, I don't sound like my normal self. I am recovering from a cold. Apologies that you had to listen to me for, I don't even know how long I've been going for now. I haven't kept track. Well over an hour, I'm sure. So thank you for that. And if you did enjoy the episode, despite all of it, having to just hear my voice, my sick voice, for all this time rant about this game, let us know. You can leave us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts or feedback on your platform of choice. And stay tuned for more content. This was originally intended to be part of our Spooky Month content. So now we're going to finally get into what we should have gotten into November, and it's already fucking December. But Mario and Luigi Brothership, Part 1 and Part 2, let's get those out as quickly as possible. I promise. I'm trying to make it happen. So that way we can get into Zelda Month. And we're going to be talking about Ocarina of Time. We'll have returning guest Dan Rockwood, as well as guests from the last video game podcast on that. And I'm very excited to be recording that very soon. So a 2-part episode on Mario and Luigi Brothership, with Part 1 being spoiler-free. Let's get that out this week, as long as I can get Zach. That way we can talk about the game, get the game launch review out while the game is within a month of release. And then Part 2, we'll get into full spoilers. And then our 2-part episode on Ocarina of Time as well. And then our holiday special is going to be what we meant to do last year, The Grinch. So stay tuned for all of that. On Collateral Cinema, we should be getting into Bad Movie December. This last month, we recorded episodes on Street Fighter. And as of the time of recording this, we just finished recording and editing Back to the Future. Street Fighter was kind of a collab special with not only Collateral Cinema and Collateral Gaming, but Cinema Recall and Film Rage as well. So go check that out. And Back to the Future as well. And then this upcoming month is going to be Bad Movie December. So we're going to be talking about Neil Breen's Pass Through, as well as Samurai Cop 1 and 2. And that is going to be a lot of fun. Of course, our holiday special is going to be our annual crossover with the folks over at Victims and Villains, or specifically, in this case, Abyss Gazing, a horror podcast, as we talk about Terrifier 3. I saw that in theaters. It was very, very good. I very much enjoyed it. So any time of year is a good time to talk about horror content. And I'm glad to have the opportunity to talk about more of it with you today. So you can find Collateral Gaming and Collateral Cinema wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also visit us on social media. I've recently been working on our Blue Sky and Threads accounts. So go follow us there, especially if you're leaving the Dead Bird app. Go hit us up on Blue Sky and Threads. I'm definitely putting a lot more effort into those platforms. And also subscribe to our Patreon, where we have exclusive Let's Play video game commentaries, with more to come now that I have a capture card. Speaking of Let's Plays, I did just launch a new series on Collateral Let's Play called Call of Duty Saturdays. Our first episode was a success. I do need to fuck with the audio mixing a little bit. I think that made the game too loud and you can't hear me as well. So I'll fix that in the next episode. And this last weekend, I didn't get a chance to record Call of Duty Saturday because I was on vacation, but rest assured, this upcoming Saturday, as of the time of release, we should be getting back into that. Also, we should have out our first episode of Phoenix Wright Wednesdays, as Bo, Robert, and I recorded that together. And yeah, so definitely check out Phoenix Wright Wednesdays. We got through the first case of Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney, the first turnabout, and that was a lot of fun, especially introducing Robert to that. And we'll continue to play through each of the cases of the game, one section at a time, and until we complete not only the Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney trilogy, but every Ace Attorney game. So Bo is going to mainly be handling those. I don't know if I'll be on every single episode, but every time I'm down and I can record with him, I will, because I love doing those voices with him. It's a lot of fun. And you guys know I love Ace Attorney. I fucks with Ace Attorney, man. But with all that being said, I've been Ashley Chancellor, and this is Collateral Gaming, and we are out. Collateral Gaming is a Collateral Media podcast. All music and game clips are owned by their respective creators and are used for educational purposes only. Please don't sue us. We're poor.